With the dust settling that the Dolphins have traded Jalen Ramsey, the reports are now coming out that the Dolphins placing some phone calls around the league about potentially trading for a tight end. Who are some of the teams to watch with a surplus? We're getting into that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, the author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. We don't just say it, we live it, and that includes on days after the total you-know-what hits the fan, which we had yesterday, was just a totally chaotic day. That it really was a lot of fun to kind of sit there and process it all in real time and take a bunch of different angles like I did for A to Z and like I did here on Locked On for both a short and obviously the deep dive that we did yesterday afternoon once we got some more of the information. But the stuff that's seeping out afterwards gives you a lot of different things to sink your teeth into as far as where this football team is at, what this football team does next. And we've talked at length before the Dolphins ultimately decided to trade Jalen Ramsey that this domino had to fall first. There had to be a resolution to the Jalen Ramsey situation before you could address a veteran corner in free agency, before you can hand out any contract extensions, before you can sign anybody else. And interestingly enough, one of the reports that's come out in the immediate heels of this deal getting done is that the Dolphins are placing other calls around the rest of the league to try to explore trading for another tight end. And what that looks like for players who make sense versus who might not make sense is a little bit more complicated, right? Because you have what you expect to be a cash budget with the savings off of moving on from Ramsey and Jonnu Smith and what players fit within that box. You're probably not going to go out and get a big money player. What teams have surplus available? And that's the thing that we're going to do first here on the show is we're going to do the thing. And the thing, if you don't listen to Locked On NFL Scouting, the thing is we're going to go through every single team and we are going to spotlight who has surplus, what the rooms look like. And we'll start with the Dolphins, obviously, because they've made the move from Jonnu Smith. The Dolphins tight end room currently is Pharaoh Brown, Julian Hill, Tanner Connor, Jalen Conyers, and Hayden Rusi. Rusi, UDFA in 2024. Conyers, UDFA in 2025. Jalen Connor, UDFA in 2022. Julian Hill, UDFA in 2023. You get the point. And then Pharaoh Brown is the free agent signing on a vet minimum deal with $20,000 guaranteed. We ain't got a lot invested here as far as like where we're choosing to invest resources, which is fascinating because it is one of those position rooms that can really help define your offense. And the Dolphins have been committed to the bit. And I'm glad we got the continuation of it with Conyers. He's literally a UDFA tight end from each last 4 NFL drafts is 80% of your tight end room. Spoiler alert, there's some teams across the rest of the league that have a little bit more invested than what the Dolphins do. So we're going to work through them all quickly and just identify, does this team have a surplus, yes or no? The Buffalo Bills have Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, Jackson Hawes, as their top 3 tight ends. I would consider that a surplus. Dawson Knox took a pay cut to stay there. Dalton Kincaid, former first-round pick on a rookie contract. Hawes was a 5th-round pick this year. New England, Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper, Jaheim Bell, undrafted free agent C.J. Dupree as the top 4. I would certainly say it's a deeper room than what Miami has. As far as attractive names, we'll get into it. The Jets, Mason Taylor, 2nd-round draft choice this year. Jeremy Ruckert, Stone Smart. Not a lot to work with here. In the AFC North, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kolar, the top 3 in Baltimore. 2 of those 3 names are on rookie contracts. The stylistic player that is more like what the Dolphins departed was Isaiah Likely, but he's the younger player. Andrews is the older, more expensive player. That is a name that you will see attached to trade rumors at tight end is Mark Andrews. So I think getting any business done in the AFC East would probably be tough. I would say Baltimore is probably the first team that you point to and say, hey, maybe there's something here. Cincinnati, Mike Gesicki, Drew Sample, Eric All, who's a fourth-round pick in 2024. There's an injury there. We've done the Mike Gesicki song and dance. Probably not. Cleveland, David Njoku, Harold Fannin, Blake Whiteheart. Fannin was a third-round draft choice this year. Njoku in a contract year, but 29, dealing with some bumps and bruises. Probably not. And Pittsburgh, the Darnell Washington cat looks pretty good. Obviously, a different stylistic player is the inline player. Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward might be the best 1 through 4 that we've covered thus far. Would have been a good team to maybe get a throw in for a player back, but I would assume that means the ship has probably sailed on that front for Miami. On the AFC South, not a lot cooking with the Texans. It's Dalton Schultz as a well-established, well-paid veteran. Brevin Jordan, Cade Stover. Well, maybe Cade Stover, 2024 fourth-round choice. Maybe, but that's more of the blocker type anyway. The Colts with Tyler Loren, Mo Alley Cox, Jelani Woods, Will Mallory. Put a circle around that football team because I think there's a numbers game opportunity there where maybe there's somebody who the Colts would like to avoid sending straight to waivers. Jacksonville has remade their room almost from top to bottom. It's Brenton Strange as a second-round pick in 23, and then Johnny Munt, Hunter Long, yes, that Hunter Long, and Quentin Morris, former third stringer in Buffalo. New investments there, kind of low ceiling and low floor for the back two guys in that room as well. In Tennessee, I think this is probably one that could perk you up. There's some regime change. Chig Okonkwo in a contract year. Josh Wiley, Gunnar Helm. I think there's at least 2 teams in the Colts in the South that the Dolphins could call. And we'll get into which names we like and which ones we don't, and what some of those costs can look like as we continue to work our way through here. Denver, Evan Ingram, Adam Troutman, Lucas Kroll, pass. Kansas City, Travis Kelce, Noah Gray, Jared Wiley, Robert Tunyon, Jake Brenningstool, an undrafted free agent this year. Pass. I can't imagine Kansas City will be eager in Travis Kelce and what is presumed to be the retirement tour will give up their second best tight end. Raiders, Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, Ian Thomas, who they signed in free agency. That group of 3 should have some interest to you. We'll talk about why. And then the Chargers with Will Dissly, Tyler Conklin, Oronde Gadsden the second. That's the AFC. I see at least 3 teams with a name that I would be interested in calling on. Now, are the Dolphins interested in these types of body types? Do they want the Jonnu Smith type? Do they want another upgraded inline type? And they're just going to be more of 11 personnel team. It's hard to say. But I'm omitting the AFC East teams, and I'm going to omit Pittsburgh because you had your chance to do business with Pittsburgh. So on the fly, we're going to change this from a timing perspective. I want to talk about these 3 teams in the AFC, and then we'll do the NFC side of things second. So we're nothing if not flexible here on the show. So make sure you guys stick us. We're going to get into these 3 teams in the AFC that I think the Dolphins should be calling for tight ends, and which tight end that is next here. Locked on Dolphins. Stick with us. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. For me, it's seeing all the micro transactions throughout the course of the month and just refining that plan to get better at strategizing your purchases so you're not paying extra in fees here or a tip there with a delivery service or whatever it is. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. I think the most obvious name off this list is the Raiders with Michael Mayer. Now, somebody on the Raiders beat has reported in the last 12 hours, 18 hours, that the Raiders don't really have an interest in trading Michael Mayer, who was a second-round draft choice for the team back in 2023. Of course, they have Brock Bowers. They also have gone after some upgrades at wide receiver to try to better fill out the entirety of the room from a skill group perspective. But Mayer was the 35th overall pick in 2023. Through 2 seasons, he's had modest production. He's had some personal things that caused and prompted some time away from the team, but he's played over 1,000 snaps in 2 seasons with Las Vegas. He's caught 48 passes for 460 yards and 2 touchdowns. His pedigree at Notre Dame was very well established, and he's a rookie contract player with 2 years left. There's no signing bonus. The $3.77 million signing bonus was paid for by the Raiders when they drafted him. He's owed about $3.5 million across the next 2 seasons. So if you're the Dolphins and you're going to say, well, we're going to pay Jonnu Smith $4 million this year, but we don't want to pay him a raise. So we're going to move on and trade Jonnu Smith. And if you could find a way to get Michael Mayer for multiple years of player control and pay him less in 2 years than what you were going to pay Jonnu Smith in 1 year, and that's before Jonnu Smith got the raise, that to me is the right combination of it's a multi-year investment. It's not just a one and done, but of player cost control. So you're not losing the cost benefit of a draft pick if you were to send a draft pick, hypothetically. Maybe there's other assets that you could shake out. I think the Raiders have some needs at corner. We do a Cam Smith. Like, and we're going to get serious about adding a corner to the room. That way the Raiders get a cost-controlled player pack at a different player that they need, that you have a lot of CB3s and 4s and 5s. It would be a conversation that I would approach the Raiders about to say, hey, this one hasn't worked out for you thus far. This one hasn't worked out for us thus far. Economics can be friendly here. What do you think? And see what comes up. I don't know. Maybe the Raiders are really excited for seeing Jacorian Bennett kind of be the CB1 in Las Vegas this year. I can't imagine that that's the case. So that is the most obvious one for me for the economics of the player that you're bringing in. And just to kind of underscore, the Raiders have Eric Stokes, a 3rd-round draft choice this year, and Darian Porter, Darnay Holmes, Jacorian Bennett, the Camarian Richardson, Caillou Blue Kelly, undrafted free agent Melo Dot. That's their corner room. So I think you have a couple of different ways you could try to go about that. So I think the Raiders are interesting. I think the Titans are interesting because they have 3, and 2 of them are really young players. Like Josh Wiley was a 5th-round pick in 2023, has some of that same athletic profile type to him. So Josh Wiley, I want to get his athletic profile up from when he came through the combine. He ran up 4.69, which is 70th percentile for tight ends at 6'6 and a half, 250 pounds. He's more of a flex player. He kind of fits that Jonnu Smith type of role with not Jonnu Smith's speed, but has some of that same body type to him. So I think Josh Wiley, Okonkwo has been a productive player, and he's in a contract year. That's the downside for that proposition, though, is you're talking about a player who you're looking at a 1-year rental that you're sending an asset for that has potentially multiple years of cost control if you were going to do a draft selection. So that's the unattractive part for what the Titans have. I think Gunnar Helm was their 4th-round draft choice, would be my most attractive option, but they obviously just drafted him and they paid him his signing bonus, right? Like, are you really going to move on from that? Probably not. And then you have the Colts, where Jelani Woods, Will Mallory, I guess maybe you want to call about Mo Alley Cox. They used their first round pick in Tyler Warren. They're probably going to be excited about the implementation there. They've been trying to replace Mo Alley Cox for freaking forever. Jelani Woods has a lot of really special athletic profile traits. He's 6'7". He's 253 pounds. He has a 90th percentile wingspan at 82-inch wingspan. It's massive, 34-inch arms. You're in a 4.61. That's 88th percentile for NFL tight ends. So you want to talk about like the quintessential height, weight, speed type of player. Jelani Woods, who was drafted in the 3rd round in 2022 out of Virginia, checks a lot of boxes. But there's, stop me if you've heard this before, some injury red tape that exists with Jelani Woods. Now, it may have the Colts ready to depart. His last collected snaps and starts in 2022. So there's been some injury stuff in each of the last 2 seasons. That might be a late round 7 for 6 pick swap type thing, but it's a 1-year deal. It's a roll of the dice that I think would be worth taking for the potential upside, but you're not going to be considering it a solution to your room. You're not going to set your tight end room around that kind of player. So those are the 3 teams I think that make the most sense in the AFC for Miami to call. Mark Andrews, going to be a very popular name that's invoked in trade rumors and obviously a lot of production, but a player that's a little bit of an older player that has a mature contract. I mean, he's played 8 years in the league. He's going to turn 30 in September before the start of the regular season. So now you're moving on from Jonnu Smith to hypothetically trade a asset to acquire a 30-year-old tight end that's making more than Jonnu Smith was making. And is Mark Andrews a better all-around tight end than Jonnu Smith? Yeah, he's a better inline player than Jonnu Smith is. But the economics of that just don't add up to me at all. So, like, if you're excited about, like, a heavyweight ad, I hate to let you down, but, like, it's not for me, personally. It's just not for me. Now, we're going to do the NFC side of things. Look at the tight end rooms, identify some opportunities, talk about who we like, who we don't. That's next here, Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Let's start with the NFC East. Dallas, Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, Brevin Spanford, top 3. Ferguson seems pretty entrenched there. I believe they like him. He's in a contract year. Would assume there's not a lot of action there to be had. The Giants, Theo Johnson, Daniel Bellinger, Chris Manhertz, Greg Dulcich, top 4. This is a deep room. Philadelphia, Dallas Goedert, Grant Calcaterra, Kylan Granson, Harrison Bryant, also a deep room. Washington, Zach Ertz, John Bates, Ben Sinnott, Cole Turner / Colson Yankoff. Bates just got a new contract. Ertz they brought back on a 1-year deal. Sinnott is a 2nd-year, 2nd-round player. Would be surprised if they have an appetite to move Ben Sinnott. That's an interesting name if he's available, but I would be surprised if he's available. But I might call and make them tell me no. The Giants have a lot riding on this season. And Theo Johnson was a player who took meaningful snaps for them last year. They've kind of phased out Daniel Bellinger, who got early opportunities. He's in a contract year. That's a name for me. Like, he was the incumbent, and then they drafted Theo Johnson, and then they brought in Greg Dulcich, and then drafted Thomas Fidone in the 7th round out of Nebraska. Bellinger might be an interesting name to inquire about. It's kind of a high floor player, but it's a 1-year deal. So, that hurts the attractiveness of sending an asset to acquire him. And the Giants, with all of the other new behind Theo Johnson, might covet the established nature of Daniel Bellinger. But it'd be a name I'd at least be interested in calling on and inquiring about. It's probably the name I'm most interested in the NFC East. In the NFC North, Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet, Durham Smythe, Steven Carlson with the Chicago Bears. The Lions have Sam Laporta, Brock Wright, Shane Zylstra, Kenny Yeboah. That's the name I haven't heard in forever, Kenny Yeboah. Green Bay, Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, Ben Sims. And then Minnesota is TJ Hawkinson, Josh Oliver, who just got a very handsome new contract, Gavin Bartholomew. People are going to point to Cole Kmet because the Giants just drafted Colston Loveland in the top 10, and Kmet's a more expensive player. He's got 3 years, $30 million remaining on his contract. I would be surprised maybe because Durham Smythe has a body of work of taking snaps. I don't think he does anything particularly at a high level, but would Chicago feel like Loveland and then Smythe would be a sufficient combination? Maybe. But again, and Kmet's younger. He's 26. But 3 years, $30 million kind of feels like the opposite of what the Dolphins have been drawn towards as far as long-term flexibility. Now, they have some flexibility as far as whereas the guarantees are on that contract. But I have a hard time imagining the Dolphins offering a good enough draft pick for a player who's been a productive player, who's 26, in the prime of his career, has inline and receiving capabilities, even though there's a new head coach in Chicago. I'd be surprised. Maybe Brock Wright. I'm not particularly keen on Luke Musgrave. I think, and I know I'm not the only person who believes this, but if you weren't going to make it work with Mike Gesicki, Luke Musgrave doesn't give you anything other than like discounted play at the same style. So it's not for me. In the NFC South, Atlanta has Kyle Pitts, Charlie Warner, Felipe Franks. Carolina has Tommy Tremble, Jatavian Sanders, Mitchell Evans. The Saints have, stick with me now, Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, Jack Stoll, Dallin Holker, Taysom Hill, who's injured, Moliki Matavao, who's a 7th-round draft choice this year. The Saints have numbers. And then the Bucs have K. Dotton, Payne Durham, Ko Kieft, and Devin Culp. I love Ko Kieft coming out in 22 out of Minnesota, contract year player, just a road dog mauler inline player. Probably not what the Dolphins are looking for, but I love the player. Kyle Pitts is another popular name. 5th-year option, $10.8 million, fully guaranteed. Hasn't really been the same player since he had a knee injury earlier in his rookie contract. Falcons reportedly asking for a day 2 pick. Don't shoot the messenger would not be for me. I'm not too in on the idea of Kyle Pitts. Carolina just repaid Tommy Tremble. They just drafted Jatavian Sanders, who's a productive player, and then they drafted Mitchell Evans this year. I don't see a lot of opportunities for Carolina. New Orleans, Juwan Johnson, they just repaid. Maybe Foster Moreau. Maybe Moliki Matavao, if you can prime away, is a 7th-round draft choice. I think those are probably the 2 most sensible names off what the Saints have on their depth chart. And then I don't really see a player in Tampa, although Devin Culp, who was a 7th-round pick in 24, is kind of cut from that Jonnu Smith cloth. Which brings us to the NFC West, including what I think might be the most underrated 1 through 3 tight end room in the league. Let's start with San Francisco. George Kittle just repaid. Luke Farrell, they just paid handsomely this offseason. Braden Willis, 2023 7th-round draft choice. He was on our radar for Locked On Dolphins. He's a 4th tight end. Is he going to get a shot? A rookie contract player, and it's the kind of stuff that we're gravitating towards. The Rams have Tyler Higbee. Colby Parkinson just drafted Terrence Ferguson with their top draft choice. And then Davis Allen, who's a 5th-round pick in 2023. Davis Allen is kind of Hunter Long-y as far as who he is as a player. Parkinson's getting like $7 million per season. Higbee's probably the odd man out after this season, but he's a big money player who came back last year with 3 games left in the season after a devastating knee injury. So older player, cost, only made it back for a handful of snaps for a handful of games after a big-time knee injury. Wouldn't be too keen on acquiring the salary for Higbee. Seattle and Arizona, I think, have some names. Seattle, they have Noah Fant on the last year of his current 2-year, $21 million contract, but he got more than 50% of it up front. So it's less than $10 million for a player who can play in line, but has athletic profile-wise some of the same traits as a Jonnu Smith. They drafted A.J. Barner in the 4th round in 2024, and he looks like a hit. And then they also, in the 2nd round this year, drafted Elijah Arroyo in the 2nd round. They have former Dolphin legend Eric Saubert as the 4th tight end. There's a surplus there in 2 players that were drafted that has me looking at Saubert. Wasn't really a productive player in Miami, but you would assume is available. He spent time in the Shanahan offenses between in Miami and San Francisco, and Noah Fant, who would be a little bit more of a splashy, but he's in a contract year owed, I think, $8.5 million. He's going to turn 28 in November. It's kind of a Minkah Fitzpatrick equivalent, but in a contract year where Minkah at least has 2 years left on his deal if you want it. And then you have Arizona. Trey McBride, 2nd highest paid tight end in football behind George Kittle. Tip Ryman was a really big fan. Thought the Cardinals overdrafted him a little bit based off his blocking profile, but as an inline Y, 3rd round draft choice in 2024. And then you have Elijah Higgins, former Dolphins draft pick, as the 3rd tight end. I'd call. I think I'd call. And I would see, like, what would you like for Elijah Higgins? I'm not saying that's the solution to your answer, to your question at tight end. But Elijah Higgins, I think, is a really interesting opportunity because he has 2 years left on his contract. He was a Dolphins 6th round draft choice in 23, right? So college wide receiver convert. He's played. He played in 16 games last year. He played almost 400 snaps. Now he had 20 catches for 172 yards. He's an underneath target. But this is a player you obviously liked. He's kind of buried on the depth chart. The Cardinals have other players, including a marquee player at the position and a 3rd round draft choice from last year. They added Josiah DeGuara, who's kind of like a similar type player to Higgins. I'd call Arizona. So I think you have good opportunities in the NFC, personally, between Seattle, with if you want the splash play, or if you want the guy who's been here as a role player and you just want another role player in Saubert. Braden Willis as an upside swing, as a multi-tool player that's kind of like a Jalen Conyers, who you have as UDFA this year. Elijah Higgins, who you drafted, makes some sense to me. New Orleans has an embarrassing surplus of tight ends in a good way for a team that might want to shop. And then you have potentially the Giants with like a Daniel Bellinger, or Greg Dulcich is an injury risk, but is super talented. Would you call on Greg Dulcich? I think you got a reasonable amount of targets and teams to call in the NFC. I do. Are any of them willing to deal? What are you willing to give? You got some surplus in draft capital in the next couple of years based off of your moves. We'll see. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. I'm glad I could get this one out before the Dolphins made any moves and rendered it pointless. So I'm going to get this thing turned around and produced and published as soon as possible. Kyle Krabs, I will talk to you all again soon. Keep it locked in right here. Locked On Dolphins. Go Fins.